Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the 17th of September, and it's 2 o'clock, and so it's time for another Daily Financial Wellness Webcast. Today we got Russ Golowin join us again. He's an elder law attorney, and we're going to talk about a really interesting topic regarding disabled persons' ability to protect some assets through stable. So we'll get into that in a second. Just a quick overview. Again, we got our disclosure out there regarding COPEC, our speakers, affiliated companies board, and retirement strategies as well. So leave that up for a little bit, but you can also visit the disclosure at the copeceducation.org website. At the bottom of the page, you can click on disclosure there as well. Go ahead and check that out if you'd like. Now, to kind of get things going here, we've got a great program, like I mentioned. Russ Golowin is an elder law attorney who does a lot of work with us and provides his insight. And so happy to have Russ. And Russ, don't see you there. There you are. So great to have you with us again. You're one of our regulars, so we have you here every week, typically on Fridays, and glad you're joining us. Now, I know that I've heard of these accounts before, but they're very specific, these stable accounts. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, and we'll kind of get into it here.
Right, so a stable account is something that's fairly new, maybe around 4 years old or so. It's an account that was specifically enacted to enable somebody who became disabled before they were 26. They can put their own money or someone else's money in this account. And when it's in that account, it does not make them ineligible for Medicaid or SSI benefits. So they're receiving government benefits for their disability. They need to have $2,000 or less in total assets to be eligible for those programs. So in the past, there was really no way for them to have money. And so that's not good. We'd like disabled people to have some cash at hand to buy things they need and be independent, or as independent as they can be. So these accounts allow money to be deposited in there without making them ineligible for their benefits. So that's kind of the very, very short description of what a stable account is for. So really,
wow.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody you know that's a person with a disability, they should probably know that these exist.
Because you are limited on how much you can do per year. So if you're 16, you might have 10 years you could utilize this, but if you don't do anything until you're 25, now you only have 1 year to do this. Is that right?
Well, not exactly. You just need to have become disabled before you're 26.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So the account could be established for somebody that's now 40 years old, but you just have to prove either because they applied for SSI before they were 26, or in some cases you can get a physician's letter that says, well, yes, this person maybe isn't on SSI, but they've been bipolar since they were early 20s, so they actually were disabled in time. Now, I will say, there is some legislation that it seems to be stalled, but there is a movement to try to make this to age 46, meaning as long as you can prove you were disabled before 46, then you can be eligible to open a stable account.
Well, two questions. When do you think, was this established, and why do you think it is 26 or 46? What's the rationale on the age? Do you know?
I really don't know what the reason for age 26 is. And I think this came into law in 2016. Actually, Ohio was the first state to make these available to persons with disabilities, which is pretty neat. The only thing I can think of is, maybe they don't want this account to be anyone and everyone that has some sort of a disability at all. Perhaps it was more for things that they assumed would affect people over their whole lives.
Okay.
But I'm not exactly sure.
Well, that's interesting. So, like, what kind of scenario? Give me an example, maybe, of where this might play a part and might be helpful to a person with disability.
Well, a real life example of somebody that came to me, a married couple, they had a daughter and she's 41 years old, and she has bipolar disorder. And it all kind of really came to a head when she was at a very prestigious university, and she ended up having to drop out of school, and since then really hasn't been able to hold a job. And so she's relying on Medicaid for her health insurance, and she gets $783 a month from SSI, and that's really all she has. And there's there's a problem, because if the parents just give her money and she leaves it in her account, well then if she receives this $10,000 gift on, September 17th, and then she doesn't spend all of it by September 30th, well, if it rolls into October, now she has more than $2,000 and she's ineligible for SSI and Medicaid beginning October 1st. So it just really causes problems. And, as parents, you want to help your children if you're able to, but it's too hard. Now, what we did was we established a stable account for this lady. Her parents now can put $15,000 a year into it. And if it's appropriate for the person with the disability, you can even set them up with a debit card. And so they then are feeling great because they're very independent. They can use this card to purchase the things they need. As long as they're called qualified disability expenses, there is certain restriction of what you can use that money for. But as long as it's used to purchase those items, then it's absolutely fine. The 15,000 does not count against her for her eligibility. She continues on Medicaid and SSI. So it's a very powerful tool and can really help those people have this sense of independence that was lacking before.
Can you, interesting, can you expound a little bit on the expenses that might be available? I know you mentioned a couple there, but maybe go more thorough through those if you could, so people can maybe understand the true difference between a qualified expense versus just going out and buying what.
Well, basically, there's a whole big laundry list of what qualified disability expenses are. It's, transportation costs, cell phone costs, television costs, clothing, all that kind of stuff. But really, what isn't included is almost the more important thing. The things that aren't included typically are housing and shelter and food, because the SSI amount that you get, the $783 a month, that is what the government says that's what you need for housing and food. And that's going to keep you alive if you get that $783. And so if you use this stable account for food or shelter, well then you might lose part or even all of your SSI. Now I kind of just misspoke there a little bit. One of the neat things about the stable account is if your parents put the money, or by the way, it doesn't have to be a parent, it could be anybody. It's just my example is a married couple providing for their child. So if a person puts the $15,000 a year in the stable account, well then what I can do is if I take money out of the stable account and use it to pay my rent all in the same calendar month, that's appropriate. Whereas if my mom gave me $1,000 to pay my rent, that would cause an ineligibility for SSI. So when you have this stable account established, it allows you to pay shelter or rent for a loved one without making them ineligible, which traditionally before this account existed was impossible. If you provided rent or shelter for a person with a disability, they were going to face a reduction in the SSI. So that's pretty great.
So if they're on SSI, but that's not enough money to pay for rent, but they can't get help, what were they doing for shelter in that situation?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You have to use the 783 to pay for your shelter. If you live with your parents, they're considered to be giving you free shelter. So you would lose at least a portion of your SSI benefit. So there was really almost no way around it.
So it's it sounds like it's really kind of helping fix a restricted loophole there, because you're not allowed to income, but the income you do get isn't enough, and so it allows you to provide some of that benefit.
That's right. And I will mention, you are permitted to put in the 15,000 a year, and that can actually accumulate. So you don't have to spend all 15,000. This account could grow to 100,000 before there's any problem at all. And by problem, I mean for SSI. SSI, if you have more than 100,000 in the stable account, SSI is going to stop. But you'll continue to be eligible for Medicaid, so you get your medical insurance paid for. And if you drop down below because you had expenses, well, then SSI could begin again. So it's not just for small amounts of money. It could, it could grow and be quite a substantial amount at some point.
Wow, interesting. So can you walk through like how it exactly works? Like how, if somebody were to set it up or?
Right. So there is a website. It's just stableaccount.org, I think. And you can just Google stable accounts, you'll find it. You can actually open up an account online. You can do it all on your own. You can get some assistance with an attorney to help you set it up and give you advice about Medicaid and SSI. That's completely up to you. But it is a pretty good website. There's FAQs that are helpful. So I would say to check that out. But basically, once the account is open, then you just need to make sure that the money is going in and being spent appropriately. There is a penalty if the person with the disability uses the money on things that aren't those qualified disability expenses. The disabled person could have to pay income tax on the amount that they spent for inappropriate things. There could be a 10% penalty added on, and they could lose Medicaid or SSI. So it is important for them to keep receipts, keep good track of what they're spending the money on. And so, of course, some people, depending on the level of their disability, they might not be able to keep the receipts. And so in some cases, that debit card might not be a good idea because it just allows free spending, and it could cause some trouble.
Make it still a little bit more complicated. Yeah, make it maybe not too easy.
Right. So there might be a designated advocate that is just the one that's making payments from that stable account for the person with the disability, just to avoid any inappropriate expenditures. So, I mean, it's not necessarily a hard thing to set up. It's just you have to know how it works and do things appropriately to avoid running into any trouble.
Yeah, and usually in those types of situations, the troubles come later. All of a sudden you find out you've been deemed ineligible and you didn't even know why. Well, it's because you started doing some movements that maybe you didn't cross-reference the different, that's one of the benefits of having somebody like you or, somebody that can see the bigger picture. Like, well, if you do this, you got to be aware you're going to lose this. You might be in the small print, but sometimes people, unfortunately, overlook a lot of that small print, and they might miss those types of ramifications. Same thing with applying for, Medicaid for long-term care, let alone disability. So I see that being very similar here.
Right, and that's a good point. For example, it might just help talking to somebody to determine what to do. For instance, I said you lose SSI if your stable account balance grows to 100,000 or more. But if you have 100,000 or more, and that's maybe growing because the funds can be invested in a certain, there are maybe 4 or 5 different options. Maybe if you have over 100,000, maybe you're not really worried about the 783 a month, right? And you don't particularly care too much about that. I don't know, that's up to the individual person. But that's something to discuss and think about as you decide how to manage this money and what to spend it on. I think those were a couple of things I wanted to mention. I forget if I mentioned this, Jay, but I want to say it before I forget. With the shelter costs or the housing, it's important to remember, if you do set up a stable account, that if the money comes out of the stable account and it's used to pay for rent, that has to go out and be paid for the rent in that same month. I can't remember if I said that, but that's a very important thing to not mess up, because that could cause that ineligibility for the next month if it wasn't done.
So it'd be helpful to make sure, like, maybe when you say the same month, is that a calendar month, or you got to take it out and pay it within a month?
The calendar month.
So you might want to move your rent to be due like on the 15th or something, so that you can take it out, pay it, but it's all within that calendar month. Is that
Right.
what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah. So there are a bunch of just little tricks and tips that can make things easier. Try to avoid some of the pitfalls that you can fall into by just, not knowing. And that's an example of one of them.
Right. Well, I'm not sure, what other questions, what other thoughts and ideas do you have that might apply to this a little bit more? It's such a vast area, and that's the problem with this is, because I know there's trusts out there. Is there any conflict with a trust maybe that you've established?
Well, I don't think there's really a conflict, but it might be a topic for another time. But one example that I have where I used a stable account was, and actually it was the same lady I mentioned to you. She also inherited about $80,000 from her aunt. And so again, the will of the aunt said that $80,000 was to go to this girl. And if she gets $80,000, she's going to be ineligible for Medicaid, ineligible for SSI. And in our case, the parents and she even knew that she would blow through that money in 2 months, probably, just shopping and doing the things she liked to do. So there's a whole other concept called a pooled trust, where you can create a trust, you can fund it with that person with the disability's money, and that's not considered an improper transfer for Medicaid. So you're able to freely put this $80,000 in the pooled trust. It doesn't count against her Medicaid eligibility, but then the trustee of that trust can take $15,000 a year out of that trust and put it in her stable account. Now that it's in the stable account, she can use that debit card for the disability expenses, and she can also then pay for her rent. She ended up getting a nice apartment, and she was able to make the transfer from the pooled trust to the stable account, from the stable account to her, and paid the rent every month. And it really, really worked out nice for her. So
Does it say that again? So the money that comes from the inheritance, that can still go to the disabled individual as long as they get it turned over to the trust right away, or does that have to go directly to the trust?
We had to first deposit that check in the disabled person's account because the will said it goes directly to her. But then immediately in the same month of receipt, it was transferred to the pooled trust.
So this action all within 1 month, that seems to be consistent here, right?
Yeah.
Money can flow, but you better get it in and out pretty darn quick so that that end of the month click, and I'm assuming that's a viewpoint, right?
Yeah, you definitely would like to try to manipulate the timing. Money comes in at the beginning of the month, so you have time to get it out. Yeah, so that's another little tip.
This is go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go.
This is interesting because I would, I don't know, I would say that and this happens a lot, when we do planning, or if you're an attorney or what, you find that you usually, instead of being proactive and planning and comprehensive, many times we're reactive, and we're dealing with what we can deal with. But boy, if you would have came to me sooner, right? If you would have came to me when you got this money, if you would have came to me as soon as you became disabled, we would have been able to do something about this. Maybe I just can't say this enough. I don't care if it's an attorney like you, if you read up, if whoever's listening reads up to and reads all this information, they get it themselves. But don't, as soon as you have a disability, as soon as you're in an accident, or you're diagnosed, or you're dealing with some life event like that, I implore everybody to please, or a child or family, please check with somebody like Russ, or anybody that can see this in its greater picture and be like, oh, well, we could do this. Because I'm thinking back to your income issue, when you mentioned the trust, well, the trust can't be given to this person directly, and it can't be given even in a stipend because it's ineligible. And then if all of a sudden, so I can put it here, then I can move it, to the trust, then I can move that $15,000 over. Because I moved that $15,000 over, I can pay for my housing and transportation and any other health and wellness and legal fees, which allows me to have that Social Security money to be able to use for going out to dinner. Am I wrong? I mean, to be able to, now I can use that money for what might be, let's call it more leisure, right? Am I thinking this correctly?
Yeah, I mean, generally, the money can be used for things that improve your life that the government doesn't provide, like paying for cable television, Netflix, cell phone, iPhone, all those sorts of things. There are options to help improve these people's lives that have a disability. It's always best to plan ahead. And so, I would tell the aunt that passed away, if she were still living, hey, don't make us create a stable account in this pooled trust. Aunt, why don't you just create a trust for your niece? And if you do it this way, we won't have to do any of this fancy stuff. You just take control and make it as easy as possible. That would be the best. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen, probably because the aunt didn't know it was an option. But there are usually something you can do to improve the status of your loved one. But you just have to ask. And like you said, Jay, ask sooner rather than later, because as time goes by and money gets spent, there's less and less that you can do to protect and preserve and improve that person's life.
Oh, great. Well, this is absolutely incredible information. Anybody that's, again, dealing with this type of stuff, just learn early. Learn about all these trust accounts and stable accounts and all these different tools and resources, and make it as easy as possible for your loved one to get that standard of living that everybody would like to have throughout their lifetime. So it's amazing how much these little bits add up to a big life-changing difference as far as what you can and can't do. So Russ, thank you. Really appreciate you joining us again today, as always. Do you have anything you want to wrap up with that we can send people off on their way with?
Nothing special this time, Jay. Just if you know someone with a disability, you might not know if it began before age 26, but make sure that they know about a stable account And if they have loved ones that would like to leave them money, make sure they know about the concept of the stable account and just in general that they can create a trust to help protect that money. And then they can go out and find assistance if they want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, great information. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll see Russ again next week. We'll have another presenter tomorrow. I think it's Nate with planning tomorrow. And so thank you so much. And we'll talk to everybody really soon. So have a great day and have a great weekend coming up.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.